Hi everyone, I am Ellen Joy Iporas, together with my group, John Gillard Roberto, Elisha Grace Macahilig, and Mark Angelo Molo. We will going to discuss the chapter 17 of the module, which is the masculinity. So before we proceed to the discussion proper, we will give you an exercise that will give you a hint on what this chapter is all about. So this exercise is called as Fix Me. So the mechanics of this exercise is you need to fix or rearrange the scrambled word accordingly. So let's start. So that's all for our motivational exercise. So let's proceed to our discussion proper. But first, I will going to cite to you the learning outcome of this report. Learning outcomes. At the end of this chapter, the students should be able to first, explain the importance of understanding that masculinity is a construct. Second, state why the concept of masculinity can be oppressive to men. Here are our table of contents. First is the men and gender studies. Second is the beginning of masculinity. Third, what makes a man a man. Fourth, proving masculinity. Fifth, an aversion to the feminine masculinity as homophobia. 6. Masculinity as power. 7. Men as the masculine generic and male entitlement. 8. Men and fragile masculinities. 9. The responsibility of men. 10. Is the Philippines a masculine country? So, next is Men and Gender Studies. This chapter will discuss the idea of manhood and masculinities from both local and international data. While information on masculinities in the Philippines is available, few discussions tackle youth and masculinity. The idea of the male gender as a gender also lacks discussion because men are often seen as the template for all genders. Any deviation from the male heterosexual templates are seen as different. The discussion of masculinities will center around straight or heterosexual cisgender men. So, straight means that these men are attracted to people from opposite genders such as women. Cisgender means that these men see themselves as men and often ascribe to themselves the role of the masculine self as a society. It is important to discuss that masculinity is the prevalent notion which shapes all aspects of society, from politics and legislation to schoolyard interactions. Only then can one see the effect of gender inequality and gender socialization on both genders. So the next topic is all about the beginning of masculinity. Carol Gilligan, an American psychologist known for her study of women's way of learning, noted that women's socialized role as caregiver tasked them with the responsibility of caring for young children. Girls who see an older woman doing a certain task will associate the gender with the task. Women then are trained from childhood to be caring and nurturing. This view learned through emulation. Hence, women's way of knowing are relational. Women learn femininity through association or attachment. More traditional models of this household have the men working solely outside of their homes, making them absent during a child's early years. The analysis of boyhood shows the men learn to be men through dissociation and separation posited by Gilligan as the root of men's problem. Boys and then later young men learn masculinity from they see on media and interactions in their schools. The lack of empathy of men may be rooted in the fact that they are actually socialized to be unlike women who must have empathy to raise children. Third topic is what makes a man a man? One can say that man is strong, but the degree of strength one may have depends on age, biology, and physical ability. Similarly, people may have different kinds of strength, from physical to emotional and even mental. Is a man less of man because he is physically weaker than his wife? Or because he earned less than his female counterpart? So that is the big question among men. Manhood is something that one can describe through adjectives: tough, brave, strong, but whose definition is often continuously evolving. Sociologist Michael Kimmel, for example, describes the specific meaning of masculinity to be fluid. Tough, one thing remains constant: the need to prove one's masculinity, regardless of how it is defined in a given culture, a specific period of time. In his book, Kimmel identifies four rules of American masculinity in the 1970s as described by psychologist Robert Brannon. First is the no sissy stuff. Masculinity is based on the relentless repetition of the feminine. Masculinity is never sissy. Be a big wheel. We measure masculinity by the size of your paycheck, wealth, power, and status are all markers of masculinity. As US bumper sticker put it, he who has the most toys when he dies wins. Be a sturdy oak. What makes a man is that he is reliable in a crisis. And what makes him reliable in a crisis is that he resembles an inanimate object, a rock, a pillar, a tree. Give him hell. Exude an aura of daring and aggression. Take risk, live life on the edge, and go for it. While these factors may have changed, some remain true until today but in different forms. Joseph Vandello and Jennifer Bosson, two psychologists who study manhood, added that there are various forms of masculinities, although at a given time, only one masculinity dominates the gender hierarchy above all: feminities and other masculinities. This is known as the hegemonic masculinity. It explains why some men who act a certain way feel as tough they can dominate both men and women. Vandello and Bosson also show factors that surrounds manhood. It is hard to win, requires constant proof, and it is easy to lose. So, the next subtopic will be going to discuss by John Gillard Roberto.
Proving masculinity. Gender is identity that is socially constructed through interaction. The constant need to prove one's masculinity, along with the notion that it is hard to win and easy to lose, makes one wonder. It says that proving masculinity is to prove that this person is a strong or a brave man. Example, being masculine are having strength, courage, independence, leadership, and assertiveness. Who do men need to prove themselves to? One myth of manhood is that men act to prove themselves to women. But the fact that masculinity is so strong connected to a shared gender identity shows that men must constantly prove their masculinity to other men. Men perform their masculinity mostly to and for other men. They also compare themselves to other men as was done in childhood learning. Women may even be the objects or the means to the end of impressing other men. As stated by Vandello and Bosson, first, manhood is hard to win, while no actual rituals signal the transition of a boy into manhood. Various subcultures devise ways to initiate a boy into male adulthood. These rituals may include initiation, processes to enter fraternities, gangs, or even clubs. Others may win manhood through physical activities, sports, or even through public acts of homophobia. The idea that manhood requires proof places men in positions to commit dangerous or violent tasks. Alternatively, men will also avoid or even ridicule tasks that challenge their manhood, such as doing activities normally performed by women. An example of masculine culture is lad culture. It is variety of masculinities and cultures in UK university communities, which men and women may move into and out of, but which may shape their identities and attitudes and frame their experience of university life. Other example, NUS defines lad culture as a group or pack mentality residing in activities such as sport, heavy alcohol consumption, and banter, which is often sexist, misogynistic, racist, or homophobic. Lad culture is a concept often linked to the crisis of masculinity in the West. In this campus culture, men in colleges or perpetuate traditions that objectify and sexualize others, usually women and the LGBT. This practice is done to reclaim their manhood as possible backlash to feminism and the empowerment of women. Because of the potential and real harm lad culture may do to students, from binge drinking to harassment, it is connected to raunch culture. It is frequently linked to urgent issues like sexual harassment, violence against women in schools, and prejudice towards LGBT people, particularly religious organizations or certain racial or ethnic groups. In the US, the counterpart of lad culture is the hookup culture on campuses. Here, sexual activity is regarded as the transition marker from boyhood into manhood. The use of sexuality to define masculinity has shown that boys either use their sexualized gender traits to enact their sexuality or use their sexuality to represent their socialized gender traits, power, detachment, competition. Men are instructed to emotionally remove themselves from women, objectify girls, and engage in promiscuity by dominant social standards. Women therefore serve as a tool for men to demonstrate their strength and virility. Unfortunately, these conventions prohibited males from being meaningful and close relationships. An aversion to the feminine, masculinity as homophobia. Manhood at its essence is still defined in relation to womanhood, or in opposition to women. Women in non-dominant masculinities are seen as the other, in which heterosexual men projects identities, against whom they stack the desk as to compete in their situation that they will always win. So that by suppressing them, men may stake a claim for their own manhood. An argument for the condition of manhood blinds people the content of manhood or the behavior that men must display. This content is equally important to note as it provides the behaviors expected of men and the behaviors that can add to one's understanding of why men do what they do and how gender drives their behaviors. One example is the condemning of non-masculine actions. Boys, for example, are severely punished for acting in a non-masculine way. A true man must then have aversions to anything feminine, or consciously declare themselves as secure with their masculinity before doing anything stereotypically feminine. A study by Kimmel shows that masculinity may be studied in relation to school shootings in the US. The perpetrators of these school shootings were all male, who do not fall under the typical male figure. Therefore, these boys were bullied, ostracized, and questioned for their sexuality due to their lack of masculinity. And their ultimate revenge seems to be their final act to prove themselves as men, or as a revenge against those who bullied them for being different and not ascribing to the male code of that school. Masculinity, through its dissociation with woman and femininity, may have become a form of homophobia. Homophobia is not the fear itself of gay men, but the fear that a man can and will become a gay or feminine. Kimmel sees homophobia as the cause of sexism, racism, and heterosexism, as it is an aversion to become the other of the non-dominant masculinity. In its extreme self, masculinity then is the desire to be not woman, or not feminine, which has become fragile to changing gender norms of society. Masculinity as power. The ever-pervading fear of losing one's masculinity may be tied to the fear of losing power. Masculinity is about power. A masculine man is a powerful man who controls various resources. When the masculinity of a man is challenged, he loses power unless he defends himself. It is challenged when a man is associated with the feminine or perhaps when he is seen defending women or members of the LGBT. While making sexist, homophobic, or racist statement is often part and parcel of heterosexual masculinity. Silence and consent to this puts down result in gender-based violence and oppressive structures thriving in a society. Kimmel notes, shame leads to silence, the silence that keeps other people believing that we are actually approve of the things that are done to women, to minorities, to gay and lesbian in our culture. The frightened silence as we scurry past a woman being hustled by man on the street. That furtive silence when men make sexist or racist jokes in the bar. The clammy-handed silence when guy in the office make gay-bashing jokes. Men's silence is that keeps the system running, which is why women often complain about their male friends not understanding when they are alone and laughing at sexist jokes when they are out with a group. Men's silence, which is interpreted as consent, is a result of this fear, and they allow injustices against women, LGBT people, people in low position of authority, and others to continue. Gay bashing, rape jokes, and sexist remarks are encouraged by those who remain silent. Accepting these remarks upholds the damaging hegemonic masculinity, as society's low opinions of women is shown by this fear.
Good day, I'm Alicia Grace Makikilig, and today I will discuss male as the masculine generic and male entitlement. Males are generally considered to be masculine generic, which is why gender studies frequently exclusively conjure images of women. A man's status has made his man's gender is not significant or necessary for his gender invisible. He can access everything because there is no societal impediments in his way due to his gender commodities. Masculinity was mostly determined by women and how they see and value males. Experience being a man. Due to their lack of acknowledgement, women, LGBT people, and others are engaged in this solitary battle for gender equality. Non-male, non-straight, concerned this viewpoint was completely dissimilar to how males had self-view. Males are not aware that they should be included in. They are not regarded as gendered beings in this discourse. Men, even if they have many privileges, they could perceive themselves as weak, are provided them at employment, in school, and during their formative years. So the next topic will be men and fragile masculinities. One buzzword that surrounds masculinity involves what is called fragile masculinities. Men have the privilege of being the generic template of human being. Women will always wake up as women because society constantly brings attention to see their womanhood. Men, given their privilege, may ignore their gender completely. One state that these issues are imaginary and that our men are privileged enough to overcome these issues given the power granted to them by the society. However, this is not the case as shown as the gender role conflict scale, the GRCS. The GRCS describes the amount of psychological conflict, anxiety, tension, and general negative emotions surrounding the male's role. It states that having masculinity challenge causes the greatest stress in most men, and that those with high levels of this type are anxiety are less likely to seek counsel. The thought of fragile manhood may be its roots in the notion that women have in fact changed the way they live with manliness. It is challenging to hold onto something that is so readily threatened or misplaced. Keep these qualities that men have used to identify their manhood. Themselves are transforming that women have in fact changed their living styles.
The responsibility of man Michael Kimmel in his address in the 2001 International Women's Day seminar had this to say about men in gender equality. I believe that the reason that the movement for women's equality remains only a partial victory has to do with men in every arena in politics, military, workplace, professions, and education. The single greatest obstacle to women's equality is the behaviors and attitudes of men. He adds that it is necessary to change the attitudes of men towards gender equality to show them that it is also beneficial to them as men to be allies for gender equality. After all, it takes both genders' cooperation to change a sexist culture. Women have been seeing radical changes concerning how society treats their gender, from school and workplace inclusion to policies that fight for their reproductive rights. Men's rights have remained the same. There has been little no changes in their experience of work or sexuality. Men's gender identity being rooted in their dissociation with women may be viewed as the cause for men's gender confusion, unlike women who have been afforded the same opportunities through gender equality. Unexpectedly, what men have used to define their masculinity has taken over their masculine roles. Men have no way to adjust to their changing gender role precisely because they do not see themselves as gendered being. Perhaps an end to traditionally masculinity, given its harmful nature, could be the big step in the direction of global equal rights. Is the Philippines a masculine country? The six-dimensional model of national culture by Gerd Hofstede shows the six basic issues that society needs to come to terms in order to organize itself. The Philippines leans towards what he calls a masculine society, 64 on a scale of 1 to 100, meaning that the Philippines may be driven to realize masculine values. These values include competition, achievement, and success. They put a premium on achievement through winning or being the best in one's field. On the other hand, feminine values involve caring for others and about the quality of life in the community. While the Philippines is community oriented, its focus is currently on global competition and personal achievement. The Filipino masculinity is changing due to migration and globalization. Filipinos in general are becoming more westernized. Since the advent of colonization and the creation of modern Philippine society, men were made to be dominant, tough, and oriented toward building camaraderie among themselves. Up to these days, the male barkada is seen as a brotherhood, a space for men to be men, free from their wives and responsibilities, as it is accepted that men often needed a break from their work and home life. Some men who were seen as subjected under the wife's control or under the saya were free to express themselves among their barkada. The so-called forms of typical Filipino masculinities seem to express these genders' need to assert its dominance and capability. Filipino masculinities are driven by their status as the main actors in the public realm, as drivers of development and wealth creation. Even in pre-Hispanic times, ritual feasting, conspicuous consumption, and display of skill and strength were means to assert the worth of men as pillars of the community.